I think it's interesting. The record of the Mulroney government was not perfect. Mistakes were made, certain things that ought to have been done weren't done, and certain things that were done shouldn't have been done. But the fact is, a lot was accomplished. Many new national parks, an effort made to reform pollution control laws, the first major overhaul of national parks policy in favor of conservation in half a century, the outlawing of lead in gasoline, the strengthening of motor vehicle emission controls more generally, and so on and so forth, the green paper on the environment. All of these accomplishments in a relatively short period of time were virtually, I would say, utterly unprecedented. But the irony and the paradox is that the extent to which the Mulroney government elevated the environment on the public agenda, for example, through summits on acid rain with the President of the United States, not just once, but successively, over and over again, leading to, by all accounts, a very sound accord on acid rain. All of that simply presented a target for the government's enemies, such that when the new government took over, the Chrétien government took over, it said, well, Mulroney did this, he tried to do that, he accomplished this, he accomplished that, and what good did it do him? Every time he did the very things that the environmentalists called upon him to do, he got attacked. The more you elevate the environment on the public agenda, the more you present a target. That target is the politicians in the government, and the Chrétien people learned from, quote unquote, the mistakes of the Mulroney government in this area. Very strategically, the Chrétien people said, we're not going to make the same mistake. We're not going to just present a target for the government's enemies. It's better for us to low bridge the environment, slash the Department of the Environment in half, carve it up, send the Parks Department over to the innocuous Department of Heritage, and generally take it off the public agenda, starve it of funds, and slash the number of public servants in this area, and present no target to environmentalists who won't give us any credit in any event. And the paradox and the irony and the scandal is that this is good politics. It's bad environmentalism, it's bad public policy, it's bad government, but it's good politics. I'm not an unbridled apologist for Brian Mulroney, never have been, am not now. But I can say this with certitude, his heart was in the right place in the environmental area, particularly in the area of acid rain. He genuinely was concerned about the problem, maybe as a Quebecer, wanted progress in this area, and devoted a lot of his own moral authority to the issue, even to the extent of bringing it to the table, and not just to the table, but to the top of the table in all his summit meetings with two presidents, Ronald Reagan and George Bush. Not because it was good politics. He was attacked, he was abused by the media, by environmentalists, by the opposition over and over again in this area. And even when he achieved a really sound accord with the Americans on acid rain, he got no credit. So it's easy to say, well, it's window dressing. Politicians are just playing some sort of political game. And my own experience is that if it's such good politics, if it's such good window dressing, then why were these very same people so abused? And why did they pay such a high price when they elevated the environment on the political agenda, only to present a target for their enemies? I think you have to give them a degree of credit for genuine concern about the area in question. And in the case of Mr. Mulroney, he had that concern. I think the country and Canadians as a whole have lost a lot of ground. I think the environment was emerging as a major area of public policy in which much progress was beginning to be made. Since then, even the Department of the Environment of the Government of Canada has been slashed to about half its former size. It's lost half its personnel. And I think it's lost an enormous amount of clout at the cabinet table. I think we environmentalists ourselves have only ourselves to blame. I think the essential problem is that, like it or not, politicians are the ones who make public policy in the environmental field. And unless they are rewarded when they do good things for the environment and punished when they don't, then there'll be no incentive or motivation for politicians to act. And at present, and for a long time, environmentalists have been too quick to criticize politicians, even when they do the very things that the environmentalists called on them to do, and very, very slow to give credit where credit is due. There has to be a tighter link between good performance by politicians in government, in the environmental field, and success at the ballot box. At present, there isn't. Politicians can ignore the environment and even be hostile to the environment with impunity, partly because the environmental movement itself has lost effectiveness and credibility with the government. I think it's terribly important to realize that politicians serve in the domain of compromise. Politics and government are by definition the realm of compromise. If environmentalists take very absolutist and dogmatic and even evangelical positions, not realizing that there has to be a degree of give and take, a certain amount of compromise. If they don't appreciate the position in which politicians and government find themselves, then this all or nothing approach, 10 times out of 10, is going to produce nothing. Environmentalists have to learn to be better politicians and to play the political game better if they're going to be better environmentalists. The politician needs the clear conscience of the environmental movement to put pressure on government and even on, maybe especially, environmental politicians themselves. And that can only come about if there's a degree of distance between the two, that there cannot be, or be perceived to be by the public, a conflict of interest in the sense that the two are too cozy. At the same time, a politician, in particular an environmental politician, an environment minister, say, needs to have a constituency behind him. He or she needs to be able to go to the cabinet table and say, if we pursue this course of action, the environmental movement will ensure that we get credit, that there are votes to be harvested. Obviously, politicians should be doing the right thing by the environment for noble and high-principled reasons. But ultimately, they're going to be influenced to some extent by electoral politics, because after all, they have to get elected. And if that constituency is not out there, and if it's not putting pressure effectively on politicians, giving credit where credit is due, criticizing where criticism is due, then the whole area of the environment will suffer. I think in my time as Minister of the Environment, it served the interests of some environmental groups to have an enemy, whether it was to expand their membership list or to raise money or heighten their profile with the media. And a convenient enemy was frequently the Minister of the Environment. If you could paint him in this case, as a rogue, as an enemy of the environment, as a barrier between the environmental groups and environmentalists on the one hand and progress in the environmental field on the other, then it was an awful lot easier to convince people to part with their dollar in the interest of the environment. If, on the other hand, the Minister of the Environment was perceived to be himself an environmentalist and on the side of the angels, and the government looked as though it was doing the right thing and was building up a good track record in the environmental field, conversely, it was more difficult for some environmental groups to convince the public that those groups were needed, and contributions from the public to the environmental groups was in the interest of the environment. You had to create a sense of crisis. You had to create a boogeyman, an ogre, to advance your agenda, which in some cases was not the environmental agenda so much as the career interests of the people raising the money or putting together the membership lists. I thought it was almost like the difference between night and day as to whether the group was locally based with probably a fairly broad, maybe small, but broad constituency behind it within the local community to save a marsh or preserve a river or have designated a trail or something or other as a park or preserve or whatever. That sort of local constituency rooted group. And in some cases, the larger ones that may have been better funded, might have been more glib, more articulate, better known nationally, better access to the media, but which ultimately wasn't nearly as effective because what it made up for in personnel, and funding, and national profile, and access to the media, it suffered for lack of real commitment to the environment and grassroots support. In those jurisdictions where environmental groups and environmentalists didn't put all their eggs in one basket, didn't attach themselves exclusively to one political party or another, but took a fairly pan-partisan approach, supported politicians irrespective of their stripe when they did good work, and attacked politicians irrespective of their political stripe when they were deserving of criticism, they were more effective. The environment is so important, the stakes are so high, we're talking about life and death here, that environmentalists should make allies and link arms with anyone, anywhere, that the agenda of environmentalists can be advanced. And that can occur just as easily in a conservative party as in a liberal party, a traditional party or a socialist party. None of them has a monopoly on virtue in this area, and not one of them has a flawless record. Much environmental law and authority at the federal level is being devolved to the provinces. And it's bad enough that the laws are enforced on a discretionary basis, but increasingly laws that affect the entire nation and were devised in the interest of Canadians as a whole are at the discretion of politicians at the provincial level whose constituency is only as broad as the boundaries of that province. I think the more the law is discretionary or subjective or dependent on the goodwill of the government or the politician in question, the more important it is for there to be in Canada a day of reckoning, a constituency out there that rewards politicians for acting well in the environmental field and punishes them severely when they act badly. You can't have it both ways. You can't vest in politicians a great deal of discretion in the environmental field and then not have any day of reckoning. No ballot box question to reward or punish their performance between elections. Otherwise you have the worst of both worlds. From one country to another, even between Canada and the United States, the systems may be different. You might have a parliamentary government, you might have congressional governments, you might have responsible government, you might have executive government, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, where there's a ballot box, the same pressures prevail. Politicians are concerned about getting re-elected. And to the extent that their performance in office relates to how well they're going to do at election time, human nature being what it is, politicians will have one eye on the legislative agenda and one eye on the ballot box. More and more problems in the environmental field, like the economy itself, are global. We could do everything within our jurisdiction and within our power to deal with our own backyard, cleaning it up and making sure that everything is ordered at home, and yet we'd still be at the mercy of pollution from other countries. The assaults on the ozone layer, for example, acid rain that emanates from across the border, in the United States and as far away as Europe. We are citizens of the world, and we have to be citizens of the world in the environmental field as in other areas. We can influence the public policy of other jurisdictions, but the best way to do that is to come to the table with clean hands and to make sure that our own backyard is clean, so that nobody can point a finger at us and say, well, physician, heal thyself.